The Detroit Jazz Festival was recently voted the second best festival in North America by readers of Jazz Times magazine. I want to know what was first. And nearly 25% of the attendees come from out of state. I'm joined today by key members of the Jazz Festival's team, Cornell Batie, Chris Collins, and Sharon Banks. Chris, I want to talk to you a little bit about the music that we just heard. One of the things that always inspires me about Detroit is that heritage of jazz and culture that sort of is passed down from one generation to the next. The drummer in that particular combo was Galen McKinney, whose dad was a huge jazz legend here in Detroit, and that's sort of how we keep that alive, right? We just sort of keep passing it on through generations. It is, and you know, as you know, I grew up, you know, a musician in this town. It was my only thought was to just play around the world. So I had the great fortune of having time with some of these amazing cats. But it speaks, what you're talking about, this idea of mentoring people, this idea of passing on language and passing on experiences. I've always felt that's a powerful part of Detroit. Yeah. I feel it. We understand how important that is to not only maintaining an understanding of our history, but to move together forward. Yeah. And Marcus was a big part of that. Harold McKinney was a big part of that. Matt Michaels, Larry Nazzaro, these guys that just invested themselves every day. And with that tune we just heard, here's this great house band with Rob and Galen and Michael. They're going to be doing this very special jam session on Friday night after hours. So it's like 11 to 1:30 up in the Marriott. Everyone's invited. And it's a jam session celebrating Marcus and celebrating the idea of the great mentors we've had and bringing together his family, his friends, all the musicians that were around him, play together and to have a social gathering that I think Marcus would have smiled on. Let's talk a little bit about Marcus Belgrave. The last time I saw Galen McKinney perform, he was supposed to be with her, and he'd already sort of fallen ill, and that turned out to be the prelude to his passing. Talk about the influence that he's had on Detroit jazz. I mean, I think a lot of times it gets lost that we have our own sort of distinctive history with this art form. We have our own sound. You think of a city like New Orleans, they have their sound. We have ours too, and Marcus was a huge part of forming that. He was. He shaped the Detroit vocabulary, and his musical experiences with Ray Charles in the early days, and it very much speaks to the Detroit musicians' experience of having R&B and blues and other musical forms interject into the jazz vocabulary. So certainly an homage to bebop and bird and the avant-garde with this influence of blues and rhythm and blues and even pop musical forms. It all coalesces into what we call the Detroit sound. Yeah. And Marcus not only perpetuated that in the vocabulary he used, but his sound on his trumpet spoke to you the minute you heard it. Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk about the educational components of Jazz Fest. You mentioned in the first segment, Sharon, that you guys reach out beyond where the concerts actually take place to places in Detroit, in neighborhoods, but primarily focused on reaching young people. Reaching our young people, and there are several schools, and I believe 6 schools? 7 now. 7 schools now that we're in, where we are very structured with an education program for teaching, for mentoring, for providing outlets for these young people that, frankly, they wouldn't get anyplace else. Sure. And again, through the generosity of our philanthropist and founder in terms of the structure of the festival as we know it today, Gretchen Valade, it makes that all possible. Plus our sponsors and our foundations that come on board with us. And again, those that just drop $1 or $5 or 50 cents or whatever they can, helps us to go out into the community and bring those young people into. Well, and in terms of schools, I mean, you're talking about schools that in a lot of cases don't have their own music programs or can't afford their own music programs anymore. So that takes on an even added importance that you guys are able to do. Absolutely, and it gives them opportunities to play at the Jazz Festival, but Chris and his team find other avenues for them throughout the year. See, the Jazz Festival culminates on Labor Day weekend, but throughout the year, we're working with the young people to give them that exposure across the city. Yeah. When I think about jazz and the future of jazz, sometimes I get a little worried that that young people, if you talk to them about music, they'll talk to you about hip hop, they'll talk to you about rap, they'll talk to you about popular music, and they don't get it quite yet. All of that stuff comes from this rich history.
Yeah, but you know, it's always fascinating to me. You know, I'm also the director of jazz at Wayne State University, and I see generation after generation, and they're growing, of jazz lovers, new generations of instrumentalists and vocalists willing to commit their life to this art and craft.
Yeah.
And when we talk about what we do in our Detroit Public Schools, the J.C. Hurd Jazz Week program, and that program spawns not only now an all-star group that will be at the festival of high school students that are the top of their class, but also an alumni group. Now that it's been functional for 8 years, we have these fabulous artists that are out there in the professional world coming back, and it propagates this mentor-disciple thing of once you progress in your life, you have a responsibility here to share that with those coming up behind you. And we've tried to engender that in all our educational programs and teach the upcoming youth that eventually you're going to be in this role, and we want to help you be prepared for that role as a mentor as well.
Right. So let's talk some nuts and bolts about the festival. How many stages this year? The normal
4 performance stages and the talk tent.
And okay, so
and you really have to count the jam session after hours.
Right,
Saturday,
right.
Sunday, and our film venues Saturday and Sunday night.
Okay, and all of it's free. Anyone can go to any of these things. If you had to pick one thing that you told people, don't miss this year, what would it be?
The whole festival.
The whole thing. Come to the whole thing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and the effect on the city. You know, I mentioned in the open the amount of money this generates for the city, but it just really is the attention even that we get.
Oh, absolutely. The festival is about putting Detroit on a global cultural stage, you know, and position the city as the epicenter of all important events. And having that attention and having the Jazz Festival playing a role in that. I mean, as you said, with the jazz not being necessarily the art that you see in the younger generation, if we can continue to show that we are pushing that and we're having something that's very premier, and with the artists and the caliber of acts that we have that everyone can be exposed to, and then our year-round cultural events, along with our partnerships with DPS, I don't see a bigger way that you can help to push that movement and propel it to another level.
Yeah, really important sort of touchstone here in the city. It's hard to imagine Detroit without the festival, frankly. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, 36 years, that's a big deal.
Yes, it is.
Let's hope we all have 36 more, right? At least.